Hello and welcome. I'm Julian Ryan, the chair of the Stories in Organization Group, which is part of the National Story Network. It is my great pleasure to welcome today the founder of Main Street Connections America and Mary Means. So, and I cheerfully have brought her book. So let me, it's the thing about me Zoom Blur, it keeps everything out of focus. So I will send you a link at the end of the day or end of our session so you can have that. Well, welcome and thank you for joining us. This is a very, very special moment, and we're delighted that you're here, Mary. So, um, we have a good group, and we're recording now, so everybody knows that, and we'll let you take over from here.
I'm taking over?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh boy, there are people who would be very afraid of that. Thank heavens
I,
it's just a group of us on Zoom. Um, well, as Jules and I met and shared our backgrounds a few weeks ago, I really realized that I too am a storyteller, um, and that story is really at the core of my life's achievements, though I've never really thought of myself that way. So today I'd like to tell you a little bit about me and how the Main Street Project came to be, why it struck a chord that resonated and is still going strong 40 years after we started it, and how it led to my running a small but mighty community planning firm for 25 years. Um, and I'm going to switch to a few slides because I don't like even the thought of 20 minutes or so of a talking head. So
uh,
let's see how I do with screen sharing. There we go. Okay. And I think I'm going to get this down to just a small, let me see if I can do a view that doesn't have us taking up half the picture. Okay. Um, so I titled this ambitiously, How Stories Save the Nation's Main Streets. But I think there's a certain amount of it that as I started to think about it for this presentation was really true. Um, my firm, Mary Means and Associates, sort of we grew a reputation for our work in heritage development and helping communities discover that their history and culture was a hidden economic asset that could be tapped through story. But I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. So I really want to give you a little bit about my background. If I can get come on, how are we going to advance this? There we go. My background. Um, I'm a Southerner. My mother was a natural storyteller, being a Southerner, and I eavesdropped, which got me started at a very early age. My dad was a classical architect who loved 18th and 19th century buildings, thought the last decent design had been done about 1815. That meant that we did our family vacations in places that had a lot of history and heritage. So it was natural for me to be drawn towards places like that. I wanted to leave suburbia and I wanted to be in really authentic places. So the historic preservation field was just starting. Um, and after grad school, I was soon hired by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. So let's go to. So I was sent out to the Midwest to open a new regional office that covered like 11 states. The preservation movement barely existed at the time, and my job was selling historic preservation, helping more organizations form and keeping buildings from coming down. But what we were selling, they weren't buying. It really had no meaning to them. The stuff was old, but it wasn't historic. It was so familiar that it was just their surroundings. And in particular, the preservation movement had focused on architectural significance, and that meant treating it like art. So it was a curatorial mindset that was expensive, and to Midwesterners, it was foolish. So we had to find a way to make it meaningful, to get those in power to pay attention to it, because as I could see on my field work, town centers were really dying. Um, the highways had brought highway merchandising, and with that came the big shopping centers. And sort of everyone who was anyone was moving out there, and they were leaving behind these wonderful very sort of heritage-rich downtowns. Now, there were towns that were trying to do something about it, but what? They really had no idea what might be out there. And remember, this is the mid-1970s, so it wasn't possible to just Google, how do I save my town? So what was out there that they were looking at? Well, some went to this brand new place that was Adventureland and Fantasyland and Main Street, Disney. And when they would see the Main Street in Disney in its wonderful, colorful glory, they would return to their towns, kind of inspired to look at their towns differently and say, we could just do some paint. It would really improve things. Yes, it did, but it wasn't doing much about what was going on inside. At the other end of the spectrum of what can we do about it was the idea of removing this embarrassing, decrepit old town and setting the stage for a new developer to come in and build a shopping center in the middle of town. There's actually federal money to do this, and quite a number of towns did. This is a town in Vermont that cleared away the identical block where we're standing, and that stood vacant for 30 years. Now just imagine the daily shame of that, the daily feeling of we really can't do anything right. So in the middle somewhere was, let's just cover up the old buildings. They're kind of creaky and embarrassing, and we could look modern like the shopping center. So there were these slipcover salesmen who would come around, and you would see these, you've probably seen them in many towns. They would be covering up what the brick building here might be like underneath. And that still really wasn't doing much in terms of keeping the town going. So we really had two overarching issues, as I saw it in my field work. First was just to find a way for the communities to save their town centers. You can't save a single building in a town center without saving the stuff around it. And the other was to really begin to make preservation relevant to those in power. Activists and advocates were there, but they were seldom in power, and the ones in power were brushing it off. So who was in power? Businessmen, and I'll underline men. And where were they? You could find them downtown. So if we could make preservation work in town centers, if we could make it work downtown, we might be able to make some real progress, not only for Main Street and downtown, but for preservation in general. So with the naivete of youth, I was about 28 at the time, we boldly set out. We were going to work in 3 towns because we didn't know anything about how towns really worked. We were going to work in them for 3 years. We were going to document it. We were going to learn what worked. We were going to write a book. We were going to do conferences. We were going to make a film. And then we would have tackled that one enough and we could move on to something else. So with the help of the National Endowment for the Arts and a very benevolent building materials manufacturer who funded the whole thing, the whole 3-year project, we competitively selected 3 towns across the Midwest that together represented many of the issues that we were having to cope with. I won't go through descriptions of them. They're all kind of wonderful, and you're seeing the before pictures here on all of them. The afters are amazing. So we rolled up our sleeves and we put a National Trust staff person in each of these towns to coordinate and coach and encourage and to document. We had set out to document what we were doing. We were that bold. And we learned a lot while we were on the ground. And probably the biggest finding that we made was the importance of having an energetic person, a Main Street manager there to orchestrate all of the activity that had to happen. So we kept meeting together over 3 years, and we got together shortly before the end of it. And we took everything that we'd learned and we wallpapered several rooms of a conference center and synthesized it, tried to get it down to making it much easier to understand because there's just so much. We finally boiled it down to 4 points. They are organization. You can't get anything done without organizing yourselves and having an organization to take responsibility for it. Promotion was about attracting people to come back downtown. There were people who were going straight to the mall, young people had never been downtown, and we needed to have activities and things, events that could attract people to come back downtown and find that it was a good place to be. Design was really more than historic buildings. It was about everything that was visible in a downtown, including the trash situation, any of the route from parking lots to the buildings themselves, of course, landscaping, everything that you saw downtown, window dressing, just how the window displays were. And the last one, we struggle with what to call it, and this is not perfect, but it's economic restructuring. And what that meant was facing it that your town is never going to be the center of its market again. So stop waiting for the drugstore to come back. It ain't going to happen. And meanwhile, figure out what the town can be in this different market and do everything you can to help encourage it in that direction. So this became known as the 4-point Main Street approach. And what it really is a conceptual framework to help people understand and begin to sort out the story of where they are. Now, sometimes lost in this is that it was really all about, those 4 points are all about shifting the image, the entire image of the town. First of all, shifting the image it had to itself, its self-image, in order to restore some sense of hope and pride. And then to begin to frame its image and be able to explain it to others and show it to others. So you can imagine we were David and Goliath, and the media just absolutely jumped on it from day one, even before we selected the 3 towns. The Associated Press picked it up, and it was articles all over the country in small newspapers. All 3 television networks, only 3 at the time, they picked it up and did features on it. The National Trust had never seen anything quite like it. It was happening from all over the country, not just in the Midwest. So let's jump ahead and say that we took it to scale. We did not close down after 3 years. We'd never expected a response quite like that. We took it to scale. We got the information, the publications and things out. The film became a staple on the Rotary Club's chicken circuit, which meant they would call the next day from that town. We worked at the next level with 6 states and 30 towns, hoping to help transfer what we knew to the 6 states and help them train the people that were going to be doing it in other towns. And then other states jumped on board. We established the National Main Street Center, and it's had an astonishing impact over the ensuing 40 years. No one could have been more surprised than me to go to a conference not long ago and see the cumulative impact. It's amazing. 300,000 buildings have been renovated. These are net new businesses and net new jobs, meaning, yes, there have been closings and shifts, but this is the net effect of it. The total a year and a half ago of 85 billion in public and private investment in these smaller communities, largely smaller communities. By the way, some of those 1,600 communities are sections of major cities. Washington, D.C., Boston, Chicago, and a couple of other places have sort of Main Street districts. And this is now somewhat recognized, although the established economic development field and politicians would really rather clip ribbons in front of big sets, like landing a major highly subsidized new industry. But in truth, the smaller businesses are where the money is. Ultimately, the jobs are. This is where it all is today. And we didn't set out to do this at all. But this constitutes like a living network for resilience. It's more than just individual towns. It's towns with a trusting relationship with their Main Street organization, their state organization, and through them, the national, because the National Main Street Center is now really this large network of these communities. And it's a network for regeneration. After disasters like COVID, they can turn to each other for help that didn't exist before the internet brought us all together. Now, when the COVID crisis began and the shutdown happened, it really was evident within a few days that towns with Main Street programs were able to pivot, to advocate, and to help their small businesses to rebuild. Many of them had not ever been on the internet before, and they were able to help set them up with all that and go through all the process of applying for PPP money that kept many of them going. I wrote about this. The book was originally titled Main Street's Comeback, and I was just wrapping it up and starting the chapter on its glorious future when the pandemic started. So I had to start not quite from scratch, but it became And How It Can Come Back Again, and it came out last January. Now, I don't want to be painting such a rosy picture that says it's all okay out there. They're still struggling. All these communities are struggling, as we all are, on recovery. But these people that have been volunteering and spending their sweat and tears bringing their towns back are not going to let them stay the way they've been knocked on their heels. They're bringing them back, and it's doing well. So you might say, what did Story have to do with all this? Well, I think it had everything to do with it. First of all, if we'd called it the Downtown Revitalization Project, none of it would have happened. Boring, nobody's interested. The other is, it was believable. We were telling the truth. When we set out to say we're going to prove that economic development can happen in these settings, we knew that was going to be the number one question. If I invest in my building, what's going to be my return? So we simply collected some data that we collected regularly, so it would be easy to collect. And we took before photographs, so they matched up later with the afters. Today, 40 years later, these communities are still doing the same thing. This is the largest resource of economic data on small communities in the country. It still continues. It's part of the requirement of being part of the network. They hate it. They hated it 40 years ago. They still hate it now. And then I think the main thing is the simplicity of language made it really accessible. We weren't planning professionals who were writing for a planning professional audience and using terms like downtown revitalization. We knew it was going to be necessary to engage the businesses and the people in small communities. So we made it pretty simple in language. And that meant that it was able to get out there really easier. Now, I went on from Main Street. I left the Main Street effort in the middle 1980s, and I started Mary Means and Associates. Our tagline was building bridges between plans and people. And I did a great deal of community visioning. I know one of you is in St. Louis. You will recognize on the right-hand side, we were involved in a reboot of an effort to do a regional visioning process. Visioning is really all about helping the community articulate and literally describe, as a journalist would, if they were visiting 10 years hence, what the community is like in an ideal. And it can kind of become you remember how hard it is to put a jigsaw puzzle together if you've lost the lid with the picture on it? The vision, the story, the end game is to plant the story and keep returning to the story and have the strategies then to be able to achieve it. I also did a great deal of work because these things, my background in history and heritage was a natural for it, in heritage and cultural tourism planning. Now, this is more than just advertising places that are nice to be. It's also about taking all these raw ingredients of nature, of history, of past, of cultural and food and all of that, and in effect, putting it into a coherent form that people can understand and that can be communicated to people. So I helped a lot of regional efforts be able to do this. And the story's really been key to all of it. It's by another name. It's not generally called story. It's called interpretation. And interpretation is really all about, so what? Why should I pay attention to this? It's really boring. This question is unspoken every time someone encounters museums, historic sites, any places. So how is this question relevant and why is it important? I love this diagram, which started to appear a couple of days ago, and I had to grab it. You know, if you're up at the top of this, imagine the dullest exhibit or book you've ever read or read part of and thrown away. Like only a Civil War fanatic could appreciate a display of 100 battle maps and glass cases of guns. So interpretation is distilling to essence and expressing the larger story. My favorite example, because I worked with the guy who put it together, is the US Holocaust Memorial. After you've experienced, and I'm sure most of you have been to that amazing museum, you walk away changed, and you're not going to forget it. And the underlying interpretive theme at the Holocaust Museum, after years of trying to figure out and boil it down to the essence, before they designed the building, before they designed the exhibits, the underlying theme is witness. And indeed, we definitely witness from the moment we walk in and feel humbled by the building itself. So story is, it makes meaning and it connects the dots. And I think I've helped a number of regional efforts. I really got to be known for being able to work with long, skinny places like trails and heritage corridors, helping them raise their common story into view. And there's kind of no better example than this one from Maryland's Eastern Shore, which is now the Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad byway. That red line is 125 miles of driving or bicycling. And when we began with this, the landscape was very much like what you see in the picture here on their now brochure. Amazing history happening. This is where Harriet Tubman was born. This is where she escaped and then returned 9 times to bring out members of her family, her extended family. And along it was a network of people who were also helping. But if you were to go there, there wasn't anything there. Look at that. It's a marsh, right? And a field of soybeans. You wouldn't have any idea what happened there. So that one of the very first things we did was highly recommend that they do an audio guided tour, because it's going to take forever to do big physical stuff. You have to get the grant money together and all that. But you could produce a dramatized driving tour relatively easily. Still, it took them 9 years to do it. But today you can download an audio tour, and you'll find out, first of all, that marshland is Stewart's Canal. It was dug by enslaved people working in utterly brutal conditions for 5 years. And with the audio guide, as you're standing on the nearby road, you know that this is a farmhouse where a Quaker family hid fleeing enslaved people. And all of that landscape comes to life through story. Now, story can also really overcome boundaries. The state of Pennsylvania years ago figured out that with all their local jurisdictions, they needed a way to get counties and locals to work together, because economies don't work at a town level. They don't know boundaries, economies. And if they were going to recover from the economic changes that had happened, they were going to need to learn to work together better. So one of the vehicles for it are heritage corridors in these heritage areas. I had the privilege of doing one of the first plans and planning efforts for a very large one. This one, the Delaware and Lehigh corridor, is 165 miles long. It runs from Wilkes-Barre to Philadelphia, 5 counties, scores of localities. Its stories involved an amazing number of 19th century immigrants who were mining anthracite up in the northern regions, getting it to market via, started out with incline railways and then a canal and then a railroad. But by 1960, mining had finished. They were no longer mining anthracite, and the population just diminished, leaving behind assets that maybe weren't seen as that. Quaint towns, gorgeous scenery, but the competitiveness of people competing from town to town and county to county was really difficult. So story knows no borders. And if you have a shared heritage and a shared story, it's easier to work together on something. I wanted to take a moment to talk about why I chose these 2 slides. One is that mining, coal mining, I was there and working there within 10 years of the mines having closed. there is such shame in coal mining. There was such shame. There was such shame of we can't work. We know how to do things and the mines are there, but we can't do anything with it. So there was huge shame, and shame of children who didn't want to talk about they were from a coal mining family. You couldn't even start a coal mining history Girl Scout troop, the Girl Scout merit badge. There was such shame around it. So story has an ability to lift that up. On the right, this is a woman in front of a block tender's house on the Delaware and Lehigh Canal. She lived there. This is the grandmother of someone I met. She lived in that house and the boats passed, and she knew her surroundings. She never went farther away probably than the county she was in, if that far. So she had no access to the story of how anthracite was innovatively mined north of there. They did these amazing transportation improvements that enabled the anthracite to come down and fuel places like Bethlehem and Bethlehem Steel and concrete factories and all. That was really America's industrial might was born here in this Delaware and Lehigh Valley. That kind of story lifted up gives meaning to the individuals and the individuals who are the descendants of people who were involved in various points of it. So today, this National Heritage Card, oh, I wanted to go back to the coal miners for a moment. Why did I throw up the coal miners? Let's go back a moment. I met a woman a few years back who worked in a newspaper in Wilkes-Barre, and she told me of a guy that she worked with who he was the fastest typer she ever saw. He could just type like lightning with only 2 fingers. And she asked him one day, Joe, how did you lose your fingers? And he sort of sat back and he said, well, I was a miner. I worked in the mines. And if you lost a finger, the mine paid you $1,000. And I needed to send my kids to school. I can't even relate it without thinking about how that shifted the sense of pride in immigrants and pride in the sacrifices that people make for the next generation. So today, the Delaware and Lehigh National Heritage Corridor is 30-something years old. They have completed, it links everything up there together. It tells the stories. It convenes the volunteers to rebuild the towns and to market them, to open small businesses. And it promotes tourism through small businesses that cater to recreation and history getaways. And there's tremendously enhanced sense of community pride and resourcefulness. This Ride Along History is a commercial company, not the name of it, that is producing audio tours and itineraries for people in bicycle and bicycle camping to come and experience the whole valley. Remember that this is in the market of sort of New York, Washington, Pennsylvania, this enormous tourism market, which they're really tapping here in the Delaware. And who would have thought that you could have taken old mining towns and just another ordinary town and building along a canal and make it into this? But the pride of place is phenomenal. And what it's really doing is it's fostering collaboration. So by closing, when Jules invited me to do this she said, you're a storyteller, you have to meet other storytellers. I really hadn't thought of the role of story in my outlook and my career. It took storytellers really to open me to what had been in me all along. And that's really important to me right now because I'm working on a memoir. And it's helped me reframe my life. Not exclusively around it, but it's helped me to have, if you will, the kind of points of inquiry about, let me get us out of stop sharing here. There we go. So I'm open for questions, for discussion, for sharing of all kinds. Thank you for your rapt attention.
Unmute yourself and ask questions. This is phenomenal. Thank you so much. That's a compelling talk.
Thank you.
So Mary, I have a question. This was fabulous. Wonderful, just wonderful. I was just wondering how, organization was your first tenet. How would you go to a mayor? How would you come into, or who who brings you into a town that needs to be revitalized?
Well, at the time, we were skeptical of town governments because town governments were busy. You know, the one thing they did get information from was HUD, and HUD was trying to push out big money for pedestrian malls, for things like that, and for tearing buildings down because they were just in the way. So we tended to go to the Chamber of Commerce, the small businesses, preservation organization, but we tended to try to work with, yes, towns came into it and town governments came into it, but they weren't the leading force behind it. Eventually, of course, all this righted itself. Environmental legislation came along and stopped the flow of big money for pedestrian malls, which might have worked well in one or two college towns, but basically decimated these places. And we would help, if there was an existing organization, like a merchants organization, we'd help them get better organized and get more people in to help so that it wasn't merchants who were busy running their businesses. And one of the first things we did, and you can imagine these young whippersnappers from this organization no one's ever heard of, the National Trust for Historic Preservation, they come riding into town and they're going to have conversations about how this is going to improve the economy of your business. Right. So one of the first things we had to do was listen, just listen to what they thought their problems were and help them address them. And those tended to be things of how can we run our businesses better? So one of the first things we would do maybe in Galesburg in particular was bring in, we found out that the Small Business Administration, we were way below the radar of anything they had. And the Retail Merchants Association, they were about preventing shoplifting and collecting dues. So there really wasn't any help. So we actually organized and got people to come in on things like window display, on teaching your staff to be better at friendly greeting of people, and things like that. And after a few months of that, the buzz around town was, these people maybe ought to listen to the other things they're saying because they got some credibility. They seem to know what they're doing. Ha, we fooled them again. So then we could move into, your organization really needs to have more strength in it. And in one case, we actually found that the existing organization had gone so much to sleep that some of the brightest people had left. So our manager, Clark, had a few beers, met those folks, and he persuaded 4 of them to come back to the board as a group with the task undercurrent of helping reform the thing. So basically, we infiltrated. We did whatever it took to get them able to work together, and at least enough for us to get the pictures, get the data, and get out of town. And they've kept working ever since. These days, there's a thing called business improvement districts, which is you may have encountered them in some larger cities. It's a special, I want to say, taxing district that covers a downtown area. And the people who benefit most from the success of that area are the property owners and the people who are in that. So they tax themselves. They have to agree to do it themselves. They tax themselves a little bit that goes into a pool that does these things in that area. And the places that have it are able to not worry about the free riding guy down the street who never participates but benefits from it, or the manager having to spend half their time raising their salary. So it's an important element of it. I tell people that if there were a 5th point of the 4-point approach, it would be consistent and sustainable financing of the whole operation. So I saw a hand up, Lisa.
Yeah. Thank you, Mary, for that presentation. I was curious to know how you distinguish between story and history. With something like the Heritage Corridor, which I think is fabulous, I just am curious to know your thoughts on that and your approach to that.
Well, I have my undergraduate, I'm a product of liberal arts, and my undergraduate degree was in humanities. History was a component of it. And then my master's degree was in history. And there was so much of history I had no idea about. And there's so much history that we all had no idea about. As one of my great interpretive people experts, Schomer-Zwelling says, we make history when we need it. We find history when we need it. We didn't have women's history when I was going to school. We didn't have African-American history. There are stories, there are histories, there are layers that are out there that that are like ore. They're buried and they're found when we need them, when they start arising. And obviously in the last few years, they've begun to create some instabilities, which is good because change comes from that. So I think the difference of history is it's a set of facts that are interpreted in various ways, generally by academics, for an audience that is limited in the sense that the writing style and the presentation is not one that is accessible to a coal miner's daughter. And story is something that connects the dots of history and gives it a meaning that's contemporary. This is not without controversy. I mean, try to tell the sons of Confederate veterans that the Lost Cause was something that was created at a time when the South needed a story that made them look good in their own eyes, that let them avoid dealing with what they actually were dealing with. And look at the impact it's had on the rest of the country ever since.
Thank you. That's always been a big question and obsession with mine about the distinction between, because people use the term story sometimes in referencing history, and then sometimes people use history to it's a gray area. I mean, it's open to interpretation. So I appreciate hearing how you think about that.
Yeah, and you think the term critical race theory, there were only about 12 people in academia who had ever heard of that or knew what it was until someone brought it up. And now a whole story has been created about it that is completely false and is becoming a flashpoint. Yeah, anyone who says history's dull hasn't looked around lately.
Yeah, for sure. And
Mary, I have a question.
Sure.
My husband and I are doing some pro bono work with an organization that hopes to establish a university in Liberia. And what I'm finding is that I get all excited. I contribute as much as I can. I'm hoping people will be accountable and we can keep the momentum going. And frequently our interlocutors seem, from this perspective, to sit. They're not as responsive. And when you said it took, for example, the folks in Maryland 9 years to complete that audio trail production, I thought, Mary can offer me some insights on patience and working with, groups to keep momentum going. So any thoughts that you have, I would certainly welcome. And I am going to take copious notes.
Oh, all right. Just get the book. It's all there. No, it's not really. Somebody called our work on Main Street. They used a term that I just picked up. I love it. It's lots of little. The approach itself was so accessible that somebody could just change a sign and make a better sign. And they could just sort of do a coat of paint and make a better, change a window display. One of my, the manager, our guy in Galesburg, took photographs before pictures, and he spoke at the chamber or Rotary or something for lunch. And after he'd been there about a year, and he had the guts to show them the good, the bad, and the ugly. And when he showed a picture of a shoe store with a pile of shoes and dead flies, everybody joked around with the shoe store owner, but he made a point. And a week later, there was this wonderful display of shoes in that shoe store window. That's one example of the lots of little. So new signs, new windows, things like that, being able to show people some progress. Now I want to refer back to the jigsaw puzzle lid, because I use this metaphor forever. If all they're seeing is Joe finally got around to changing that window, and they're not seeing it as part of a larger thing where there's progress being made, it's lost. So one of the keys with the organizational side of it is to hold the jigsaw puzzle box lid. And every time something like that happens, point to it and say, see up here, the patch of blue sky? That's a piece of the blue sky. So we're on our way here. That's a couple of trees that are down here in the foreground. And believe me, Adam, the group that was at the Harriet Tubman Byway, they weren't just working on the audio guide. I'm not a fan of these kiosks and markers for interpretation, but those are lots of little too. And if the state had grant money that enabled them to install some of those, and it had grant money to help them promote this and to promote the thing and get people to come, that was showing progress. And they've been gradually kind of pointing to that jigsaw puzzle metaphor all along. So I guess I would suggest to you that find ways, well, you don't eat an elephant. That's overwhelming. You got to figure out where to start. And I made jokes when a colleague of mine, when we were working on a citywide plan for New Orleans, proposed that the city take down the Claiborne Avenue Expressway. This is an interstate highway that was built over the street that in effect divided the white from the black side of central New Orleans. And it was a huge overpass. It was like a huge expressway. And David said, you need to take this down. Well, everybody go, well, you can never do that. No, you can apply for a grant to do X. And then when this comes out of that grant, you can apply for the next grant to take it to the next stage. So basically giving people stair steps, a step-by-step how to begin tackling something like this can make it a lot less overwhelming. And you kind of you can reprogram the fright to, oh, well, that's something we can do. Oh, well, then we got that. Well, we can do this next thing too. But I think the audio guide is brilliant. You can download it for free from the internet, and many, many people have.
And Mary,
and also,
I live in Maryland, and I intend to do that today.
Oh,
Thank
that's
you.
terrific. You'll appreciate that. I didn't want it. One of the reasons I didn't want them to do the kiosk things is it's such a powerful story that it's emotional. And it's going to lose all emotion if a car stops by the side of the road and reads the thing. They need to hear it spoken, which is why I really encourage them to dramatize. In other words, I've learned that memoir is using fictional techniques to convey a personal story. It's not all fact, it's chosen. Hi there, next generation. But the dramatization of it means that people can really identify with it at a much more emotional level. And I see Monica Rhodes is just joining us.
Welcome, Monica.
Monica's with the National Park Foundation and is something of an expert in this field and is now a Loeb Fellow at Harvard.
Wonderful.
Where the ceiling is red, apparently. Hi, Monica.
Mary, one of the things.
Hey, Mary.
Welcome, Monica. I just want to say one of the amazing things is the 1 degree of connection of how it makes a difference. Like I heard about Main Street America through Lisa Overholser, who introduced me, who's with us. I got to meet that great group. Mary was on the call at the conference and we connected. But one of the gifts you have, having listened to your talk at the conference and in our just one-to-one conversations, is your enthusiasm. Like I got to take a trip to Maryland and Virginia this summer, and within a day, I had this huge, amazing list of where to go, what to see, what to eat, and it was just the joy was just coming through, and this adventure of like a big scavenger hunt. And I'm sure I was not the only person who's ever experienced that part of you. That is how you roll, basically.
Well, thank you. As I started reflecting back on this, I realized that a lot of my success in building a foundation for historic preservation in the Midwest wasn't just Main Street. It was also my ability to entertain. I was a very popular speaker. I don't know if they knew what they were getting, but they usually got a lot of humor, and they certainly got my passion for it. I'll never forget, I was asked to address the Garden Club of America's National Convention. Now, these are the wives of Fortune 500, right, at the time. And I could tell from the body language in the room, the big theater room, that they were all really, really smart women, very smart, you know, like 7 sisters, graduates and all that. And that they were identifying with me going, wow, I wish I were doing that. I wish I could do that. And they came up to me. I mean, I just threw out the line at one point. We were just starting Main Street. And I just said, you know, ladies, let's face it, you are all really, really smart. And you are all in great positions to make a difference in your community. So maybe it's time to stop rearranging flowers and get out there and start rearranging some of the wonderful historic heritage in your cities. I got a standing ovation and invitations to speak to dozens of garden clubs. And I would say, I'm not a lunch speaker. If you want me, you have access. You have to do the meeting in the evening and make it open to the public. And you have to get me some time with the mayor and like a dozen other leaders, and you have to show me the town. Because what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about your town. And some of them would not call back. Most of them did. But I ended up going and, in effect, giving them a whack on the side of the head for good. And it helped. It helped a lot because it gave access to people, those people in power that needed to start believing in a different message about the possibilities.
I want to let Monica, we're very informal here, so feel free to weigh in and opine or share a snippet of what you know about Mary or your own work. So unmute yourself, you got to do that. But feel free to join in. We are recording, just so you know, but we're sharing this with our story organization and also sharing the clip with everybody once we have it edited. So you'll have a copy too to use your work or reference as well. Welcome.
Well, I certainly look forward to watching the recording. I'm a huge fan of Mary's and have been for quite some time. I'm Monica Rhodes, and I am currently a Harvard Loeb Fellow. And I look to Mary as really a guidepost. Our careers, or my career, has followed hers in a lot of different ways, from working at the National Trust to the Park Foundation and other places. And so Mary is a huge reason why I decided to apply for the fellowship this year. She was also a Loeb Fellow. So I'm just here, in support of all of the great work of Mary's and just her deep thinking around the preservation field for decades now. So she is a rock star in our world. And I meet people all the time, and Mary knows so many folks throughout the industry. And we all are huge supporters and huge fans of her work.
Yes, I never labeled myself as a groupie, but there's always fun. And I think I got so excited after the Main Street. Do you know who shut up?
Well, you need to know a little bit about Monica, who's doing every bit as cutting edge work as I was doing in the middle 1970s with Main Street, with African-American heritage sites and bringing their stories alive and engaging audiences that would otherwise have thought this was just something for those rich white people.
So Mary, where are you showing up when you leave us? Because we'll part regretfully, but not permanently. We'll be connecting on many different ways. But where are you going lately or publishing so we can share it with the group? And then we'll make sure we get that in our follow-up notes.
Well, it's interesting. The first draft of what became the book, I had my best friend take a look at it, and she came back and said, this is wonderful. I've known you really well for 25 years, but some of this I had no idea. But she said, I have a question. It's like, are you intending this as a memoir or a narrative? Because right now it's both. And it was like this big light bulb went off, and it's like, oh yeah. And that's probably why I've been struggling with the voice, because I didn't want to tell all. Believe me, it was not easy taking it from a 3-year demonstration to staying around permanently in an organization. Well, I thought to myself, who thought you could change an organization that has historic preservation in its name? Its job is to preserve things, not change them. So I've been really struggling with a voice for it. And I decided, this is easy. I'm just going to make a narrative for the book, and then I'll write a memoir separately. So now I'm writing the memoir, and I'm part of a Zoom memoir writing group that's got a wonderful coach in California, and we meet every other week, and it's just been the great adventure I'm on now. I just love exploring my own life with a different lens.
Wonderful. And we'll look forward to reading that and seeing that, and
Well,
another opportunity to connect with you.
My groupies long ago kind of started calling me the mother of Main Street. And the other day I decided I might just call the book The Mother of Main Street.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
It has a ring.
I mean, there are all these mother issues in it. So Mother of Main Street is a logical extension of it.
That is fantastic.
That's a great title. Yes.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts, folks? What we're gonna end the call, and then we go, should have asked this, could have done that.
Adam, I think you know how to reach me through this. It's mmeans@marymeans.com. So let me know more about what you're doing and where you are in Maryland, because I'm in Maryland. I'm in Silver Spring. Where are you?
I'm in Mitchellville. We're practically neighbors.
Yeah, I come over to the nursery all the time.
So you say mmeans at
marymeans.com.
Perfect. Thank you.
And Bill Brantley, who is another board member, he does knowledge management. He has a bazillion things he's doing down in government, and he's also a Marylandite. So
okay.
You have like another new tribe forming for you.
I love and I love having the storytellers invite me into your tribe.
Yeah. Oh, you're welcome. You're just a member now.
Yeah, we're a welcoming
just
group.
appointed you. Yes.
Well, thank you all very much. I can't tell you how important this assignment has been for me personally. It's been great.
Yeah. So Lisa, we're gonna give you the big high marks because you started this whole thing from us and the connection. So one conversation, one question, I always say, always brings us forward to some amazing things. I do want to take this moment, besides saying thank you, we're going to put where we can find Mary on multiple different places. And then Monica, if you want to share your contact information, you're a new friend, so do that. And we'll follow you on LinkedIn or wherever else you're showing up. We are having another Story Lab in November 23rd on a Tuesday this time at 12 Eastern Standard Time. It's Maureen Howard. It's going to be our guest speaker. A team has graciously volunteered to be the host, as Maureen is going to talk about.
Let's tell the truth. I was voluntold.
Let me say the title first. I learned it in Queens. Okay. Trained by the nuns. She was voluntold. This is true. But she's so compelling. Okay, so Maureen is going to talk about being a reluctant COVID advocate, and maybe a team, this is your cue to unmute yourself and talk a little bit about more how you came to know her and why you're
Maureen and I served at the U.S. Embassy in Pretoria, South Africa in the late 1990s. She was one of the women who joined the Foreign Service under the women's class action suit. So she did it later in life. A woman of great passion and conviction, she resigned when the U.S. Attacked Iraq in 2003. But she's done tremendous work in housing advocacy for decades. She's a recognized subject matter expert. And I think she's ABD in mathematics at Notre Dame. So an incredible woman, really talented, and she cares deeply about social justice. She's a colleague and she's a friend, and I hope you'll join us next month when our fearless leader, Jules, has suggested politely that I might try and walk in her footsteps and lead our deliberations next month.
And I promise you a virtual hug for doing this. So
yes,
graciously.
You owe me that, my dear.
And already the connections are working because I have connections to Narrative Inc., which their founder, two of their founders started their lives in South Africa, and and we have another board member who's based there. So we're going to go global once more and make sure other people hear about this. And Mary, you're welcome to come and always be a guest with us.
I'm really glad to have made it onto your announcement list. I will. That sounds fascinating.
So until next time,
Well,
Sarah,
Jules,
thank you.
wait, can we everybody smile and I'll take a picture?
Lovely.
1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Fantastic. And she's got motor skills, not only just doing her newsletter, but she's amazing. So it's a joy. I'm always the most energized after I get off these calls.
Wonderful.
And it's a gift. The story connection is amazing. One story leads to another. So
Yes.
thank you, everybody. Be safe, be well, have an energized day, and have a beautiful weekend. Cheers.
Thank you so much. Thank
so
you.
much.
Bye-bye.